Richmond, you have 8 minutes. Do you have a presentation?
Yes, I do, and I have a few slides. Janet
yes,
did not.
So we are going to...
And
I think you can use...
Janet,
No, stay there. I think you can use this.
Okay. So yeah, Joe, just to let you know, Janet saved us 2 minutes, so I hope I get that in case I go over.
No, it doesn't work like that, Richmond.
Okay, great. Right. Thank you. I'll just take you through a few visuals just to give you a background. But I know there are a number of people in here who actually contributed to this. But basically, you can see that there was a trend over a period of time where there were a lot of nets going into countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And as you can see, it increased over a period of time. By 2010, we had more than 300 million nets being delivered, and actually having over 250 million nets being available in these sub-Saharan African countries. This just shows you the successes or where we have come from way back where there were very few nets in households up to, and for this figure or this particular picture, we're talking about Uganda, where in 2010, they had coverage of more than 70%. But are we going to keep this coverage over a period of time? And does this stay as it is? Information coming from the field and from a number of data surveys that have actually been done shows that we actually start losing our nets immediately after we have distributed them, and this is due to a number of reasons. So these curves actually show you the retention of nets as a function of time. And you see two lines there. There is the red one, which talks about a type 1 net, which is a 3-year net. And then the blue line, which talks about a net that actually lasts longer than 3 years. Now, if you look at, do I have a pointer? Okay. But basically, if you look at the 3-year span of, if you look at 3 years, what the red line looks like, we would be having a coverage of somewhere around 65 or so for a net that lasts for 3 years, ideally lasts for 3 years in a community or in a field setup. So what does this mean? Imagine a country actually gains or is able to get to a coverage through mass distributions of about 80%, which is what we are all now doing, trying to make sure we're getting as close as possible to the 80% mark for universal coverage in most countries. If we do not distribute any nets within a period of time, for a 3-year net, which shows the red line, which looks orange there, you would notice that by 3 years, where we are hoping to do yet another mass distribution, like most countries have planned, we would be having a coverage around 65%. Now, if we do a top-up, then the coverage goes up again, and then it comes down. But is this the best way for an intervention for malaria? And that is a question we've been grappling with over and over again. The blue line just shows that for a net that lasts longer, your coverage will be higher in the households, or you would have a higher retention. So what is the implication of these dips, or the net's coverage not being stable? This is an interesting graph, but in Rwanda, when we visited, we got to know that over the period of time where we've been distributing or getting nets into the communities, you notice that their OPD cases for malaria was actually dropping, coming from 2005 all the way down. And according to them, the deaths were actually, which were attributed to malaria, were also dropping. Now, in 2009, there was supposed to be replacement of nets through mass distribution. This, according to Rwanda, did not happen. And look at the upsurge of the number of OPD cases for malaria and also the deaths. This is just to say that if we do not keep our coverage as it is, we are going to see some drops in the gains that we have achieved. And this was showing in Rwanda in their cases of malaria that they were reporting. Now, yes, mass distributions have helped us, and we've been able to gain huge, we've gone over the challenges, and we have very high coverages in some of the households and in some of the communities in sub-Saharan Africa. But the question is, are we still going to fit all this into mass distributions and keep mass distributions every 3 years, where In year one, we distribute nets. It goes out there. We distribute 3, 4, 5 million nets. In some countries, 12 million. In Nigeria, they would need hundreds of millions of nets. And then we wait for 3 years and then do it all over again. For some of you who are around the tables and have been involved in mass distributions at all levels will know that it's laborious, it's difficult, and it's a huge challenge because we have issues with quantification, we're having issues with our inaccurate data, and actually in most cases we don't even complete our mass distributions. Also, there is an issue with wear and tear because nets, just like any other consumer good, is prone to these. And we also still do not really understand attrition of nets as it is. So what are we really doing when we say we want to distribute nets every 3 years through mass distributions? These are some of the limitations we're looking at, and we're hoping that it will help us find a better way of keeping our people much more healthy. Now, then in came the consensus statement, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, so I'm not going to go through. But basically, it's stated and was supporting what we were hoping was the case, that mass distributions or mass campaigns are really good. Yes, they get our coverages very high. However, we would need other channels that would help us to sustain our coverage over a long period of time at the coverage that we have been able to achieve through mass distributions. Therefore, what should we be looking at? We should be considering other channels that will complement mass distributions and help us to sustain our coverage at a very high rate over a period of time. So we started looking at a mixed model where beyond the mass distributions, we look at channels that exist and other interesting channels that we can use to make sure that people who need nets are getting them to replace their nets that are being worn out, that those who need the nets are getting the nets, and even where necessary, where there is the need and people actually have preferences, they are getting the type of nets that they need. So there was this whole concept of continuous distribution and a concept of a mixed model to ensure that we are sustaining coverage. And in that, we were looking at the household being the point of entry for nets. Bear in mind, a lot of the channels that we're looking at are channels that have been used in the past, like ANC and EPI. But in this case, these nets are not going to the recipients, as in a pregnant woman, but we're using that channel to get nets into the household to replace nets that are being lost or actually improve the coverage of the nets in the communities. It is important that as we're doing this, we make sure that we're building a net culture. Because basically, if you give someone a net and they're not going to use it, then you are actually passing nets on, but then it's not going to translate into being protected or the communities being protected with the commodity. It is also important that we look at access and equity. So
you've had your time, and I'm going to give you your 2 minutes now.
Thank you, Janet.
Extra minute.
Thank you, Janet. So quickly, I'll just talk about what we were looking at, where we talked about the push and the pull system, which was supposed to help us to be able to get as many nets out there, but then again ensure that we're not getting a spillover. So this, I have listed the number of push channels that you can use, and also the pull, and using that we're hoping to get an equilibrium. So if you look at the graph I showed you earlier where we had zigzags, this is what we are hoping countries will achieve, where they are then sustaining their coverage over a period of time at 80 or even above. Now, this is a simulation from the NetCalc tool, and this is a listing of some of the channels that have been considered in a number of countries. ANC, EPI, as you all know. Schools, very interesting. Sounds like a mini campaign and is getting nets out there. And then community schemes are being used in other countries and piloted. So this is just to say that we want to make sure that we are avoiding spillovers, because if you continue to do mass distributions over and over again, you may be putting nets in there where it may not be needed, and there may be too many nets out there. And the push and pull system is supposed to help reduce this. Now, it's important that we're using a combination of all of the channels that are available to us in the various countries, and we should be making sure that it's part of the policies and the strategies that we form in these countries. So just to end, Joe, Basically, you remember that I was talking about this upsurge of number of nets getting into countries. However, this is what we're seeing now from data that we're collecting. Now, you would see from 2013 that for sub-Saharan African countries, they need over 200 million nets for distribution in these countries. However, we only have just over 100 million nets or so that have been funded. And then the trend is the same, and it even gets worse in 2015. Therefore, it's important that we look at maximizing the efficiency of what we're doing. Are we going to go back to start targeting people like we did in the past? We have been talking about universal coverage now. Are we going to change our thinking? Are we now going to possibly look at communities that really do need these, and then we target them with particular ways of getting nets to them, be it subsidies, be it at full cost, be it free? And this is just food for thought, that this comes from the net calc. Please don't hold me to this. But basically, if you have a net that lasts for 3 years, from the Ghana simulation, you would need the quantities in brown to sustain a coverage agreed in Ghana of 80. However, if you have a net that lasts longer, these are the quantities that you need. This graph just goes to show that you save a lot of money, that is, be it the government or donors, if the nets are actually lasting longer. I'll just end by showing you these pictures. But these are nets that are of the same material, same strength. It's been regularly used, and it's in the same place and has been used for 3 years. But they look different. It just goes to say that until we have a net that really does last for 3 years or even longer, it is imperative that we also make sure that the care of the net that we distribute to communities are a factor in making sure that we are benefiting from the nets as we're supposed to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richmond, so a couple of questions. I mean, we're going to get to sort of general questions at the end, but just a couple of things. One is longer lasting nets. You say, obviously, that's critical. Is that producing, so there are two things. One is how people look after them, one is the production of them. What's the balance between them? Are you actually looking for a whole new, so we need a third generation of nets in terms of the insecticides that are put on them, and we need different types of nets that last longer? I mean, is that a manufacturing issue? Is that what is the issue there? Okay,
so I'm really happy that Janet came before me. But basically, so I am talking of the integrity of the net, and she stated clearly that the insecticide that is being used should also be looked at.
Yes.
Now, for net integrity, the data coming from the field is showing that the nets, the 3-year-old nets, are really not lasting for 3 years in some countries, as it's supposed to be. And we're hoping that there will be a lot more data coming up on net durability to show that that is not the case. So yes, the ball is in the court of the manufacturers. But before we do get a net that lasts for 3 years or probably even more, it behoves on us to also make sure that the nets that we have are taken care of. So even if it's for 2 years, you saw the nets there. For sure, the other net that was torn did not really last for the 3 years as it should, but you had another net which was of the same material. So it's important that we also include in this some BCC to make sure that people are taking good care of their nets.
Okay, and just the other question, there's a huge issue, isn't it, about free subsidized cost, etc. Because actually, you know, it's like journalism. Because we created the Internet of Information for free, it means it's then very difficult to charge. And actually, you know, so, you know, companies like The Guardian are sort of struggling with all these things. So how do you work that out? Because you give it free in one area, subsidize another, cost in another area. I mean, people expect, why are they getting it? I mean, that seems like a bit of a mess.
It looks like it, though, but in countries like Kenya, they're using this very effectively, where they're making sure that they're targeting particular channels and particular designs of net distribution to particular communities. Now, yes, it will be difficult, it will be messy, because then there's the issue about, if I get a subsidized net, can I then sell it at a higher price to a community next door? All these are the issues that need to be considered in making sure that you're designing an effective channel to get nets out there to the people that have to.
And where is it full cost?
Okay.
Do people buy them? Why do they buy them? Why do they not buy them? I mean, because that's clearly where you'd like to move to, I would imagine, because giving them for free, you can't do that forever. As you yourself said, the amount of money available for nets to provide them free is going to fall sharply. So how are you going to manage that?
So when you ask me this question, I look at Joe, because, and just for your information, Joe is planning to move to table 3 during the discussions. And basically because he wants to contribute to this, yes, we as a project are hoping that we will be able to get communities to build that net culture where beyond free nets, they would have used the nets and appreciated, therefore would want to take out money to buy a net. But my question to Joe, before we started this was, yes, is that...
So Joe's going last, so he'll give you a good kicking in a minute.
So, no, just only talk when you get to that table. So the question is this: are we going to jump straight from free to at full cost nets, or are we going to have a transition in between? And that's a topic that will be interesting to look at. But in moving to a number of countries, we noticed that before mass distributions on free nets, people were actually buying nets, and the number of nets that were sold was really impressive. However, free nets came in, and the question is, have we lost the will to take money out to buy a net?
Okay.
And I'm sure it will be a discussion point.
So that will come back to